Where exactly were Ethan and Xana from 9 p.m. on November the 12th until 1:45 a.m. on the morning of the Idaho 4 crimes? Hey everyone, it's Lucky with Unfiltered Lucky. And today I want to talk a little bit about something that hasn't made sense to me since the PCA came out in the Idaho 4 case. And it still doesn't make sense to me now. And that is, where exactly were Ethan and Xana between 9 p.m. and 1:45 a.m. on the morning of the Idaho 4 crimes? Now, weeks after these crimes occurred, law enforcement was still desperately seeking information about Ethan and Xana's whereabouts from 9 p.m. to 1:45 in the morning. Now, they knew that Ethan and Xana were at the Sigma Chi house between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. But they didn't have any information about where they were for almost 5 hours after that. So that's almost 5 hours that Ethan and Xana are completely unaccounted for. Bethany Funk stated to investigators that she saw Ethan and Xana at the Sigma Chi party. So, law enforcement for weeks after this crime occurred were asking for any information about Ethan and Xana's whereabouts between 9 and 1:45. And then when the PCA came out, all of a sudden, they were just at the Sigma Chi house the entire time. Now that's strange because Bethany did tell investigators that she saw Ethan and Xana at this party at the frat house, but she never said for how long. She never said how long Ethan and Xana were at the Sigma Chi house. She just stated that they returned home at 1:45 a.m. There were people who stated that they saw Ethan and Xana at this fraternity party between 8 and 9 p.m. But none of these people recall seeing them after 9. There's no photos, there's no video, there's no posts on social networks after 9 o'clock. So, although law enforcement knows they were at this party from 8 until 9, they didn't return home until 1:45 a.m. So that's almost 5 hours of time that they're unaccounted for on the morning that these Idaho 4 crimes occurred. Now, there's a rumor that there was a fight at the frat house and that Ethan had gotten into a fight with one of his fraternity brothers. And Xana, it's rumored, had to break this fight up. Now, we've heard about this fight at the Sigma Chi house, but it's never really been confirmed. So, did Ethan and Xana possibly leave the frat party early because of this fight? Now, there's 2 stories about where Ethan and Xana were on the night of these crimes. One of the stories is that Xana's dad stated that he spoke to Xana at midnight that night, and that Ethan and Xana were at the King Roadhouse watching movies. So apparently they had called it an early night, according to Xana's dad. Now, according to law enforcement, Ethan and Xana were at the Sigma Chi party all night long until 1:45 a.m., when Bethany stated that they finally returned home. So there's never really been any confirmation about who was correct. Was Xana's dad correct? And could Xana have possibly just told him that? Maybe not wanting to tell him where she was going that night. Or are investigators correct? Because Bethany stated that they were at the Sigma Chi party and didn't return home until 1:45 a.m. The only problem is everyone else who saw them at this frat party claimed that they have no idea where Ethan and Xana were after 9 p.m. because they didn't see them at this party after 9 o'clock. So there's never really been any confirmation about where they were at. So there's a lot of confusion about where Ethan and Xana were for 4 hours and 45 minutes. And that's a long time for them to be unaccounted for. What's so strange is that weeks had passed since the crimes had occurred, and law enforcement was still searching for answers about Ethan and Xana's whereabouts during this time. Now, weeks had gone by, so they've already questioned Bethany, which you would think that at that time when they questioned Bethany, that she would have told them that Ethan and Xana were at the Sigma Chi house until 1:45 a.m., as investigators stated in the PCA. So when investigators were looking for Ethan and Xana during this time, looking for their whereabouts, they were asking if anybody had given them a ride or if anybody was in a vehicle with them. So after they left the Sigma Chi party at 9 p.m., were they out driving somewhere or were they being driven? Now, we know that law enforcement searched all of the vehicles that were parked in front of the King Roadhouse. And we know that they did search Ethan's Jeep. So is it possible that Ethan and Xana were either driving somewhere after they left the Sigma Chi party, or maybe they were actually being driven? We know that, or it's alleged, that law enforcement has video of Brian Kohberger's car driving around this neighborhood on the night that these crimes occurred. So it would only make sense that they would have video of all of the vehicles that were driving around in this area. Is it possible that Ethan and Xana were brought to the King Roadhouse at 1:45 a.m.? And when Kaylee and Maddie returned to the King Roadhouse at 1:56 a.m., maybe they walked into a situation unknowingly. Maybe they walked into some type of situation that they weren't aware of because it was happening in Xana's bedroom down the hall. Both Kaylee and Maddie appeared to be very intoxicated in the streaming video from the grub truck. So it's very possible that when they got home at 1:56 a.m., that they walked into the house and maybe they headed straight upstairs. But there's also the possibility that when they got home, there were people in the house. And maybe they stayed and talked to these people on the main level of the house. It's very possible that these victims knew the individual or individuals who committed this crime. Because I really do believe that they did know these people. Kaylee and Maddie wouldn't have known about the fight at Sigma Chi because they weren't at the frat party. They were downtown. So they would have no idea about what happened at the Sigma Chi house that night between Ethan and Xana and Ethan's fraternity brothers. So it's very possible that Kaylee and Maddie returned home, talked to these people for a couple of minutes, and then maybe headed upstairs. Now, Kaylee's dog, Murphy, I imagine would have needed to go outside. He was less than a year old, so he was still a puppy. So he would have needed to go outside, I'm sure, as soon as Kaylee got home. And I have no doubt that she was very aware of this. So Kaylee and Maddie go upstairs to the 3rd level, and Kaylee gets her dog to take him outside. Now, he goes outside and he does his business and maybe walks around a little bit. And then Murphy and Kaylee head back upstairs to the 3rd level and go to Kaylee's bedroom. Because I do believe that Kaylee started in her bedroom that night. I don't believe that her and Maddie just decided to sleep in Maddie's bed that night. So once Kaylee and Maddie are on the 3rd level and Ethan and Xana are in Xana's bedroom on the main level, and these people are also possibly in the house who probably know Ethan and Xana, and they probably know all of the roommates. So once everybody is in their bedrooms in the house, is this when all hell breaks loose in Xana's bedroom? It's very possible that something happened that set all of this off on the main level. Now, by this time, it's very possible that Maddie was already passed out. Or it's also possible that maybe she heard the commotion going on downstairs. Now, Kaylee probably also hears this commotion going on downstairs. And maybe that's when she begins calling Jack D. Now, she calls him repeatedly because maybe she's concerned about what's going on downstairs, but she doesn't call 911 because maybe she knows these people. And she could never imagine that Ethan and Xana's lives are being taken on the floor below them. So is it possible that this is why she was calling Jack D? Because he just lives right down the street. Maybe Kaylee continues to call Jack D because she's getting more and more frightened about what might be happening downstairs with Ethan and Xana and these people who are also downstairs, who I believe that they all know. Now, when Jack D doesn't answer calls from Kaylee's phone, it's very possible that maybe she decides to go into Maddie's room and use Maddie's phone to try to call Jack, maybe hoping that he'll answer from Maddie's phone. Because maybe he doesn't want to talk to Kaylee. Maybe something happened at the corner club. But she thinks that maybe he'll answer for Maddie. So she makes 3 calls from Maddie's phone. After that, she does make one final call to Jack D's phone from her own cell phone. Now, whoever took Ethan and Xana's lives knows that Kaylee and Maddie can identify them because they saw them in the house when they returned home at 1:56 a.m. So they're aware that Kaylee and Maddie can identify them. And maybe this is when they decide that they're also going to have to take Kaylee and Maddie's lives as well. So it's very possible that Kaylee went back to her own room to make that final call to Jack D. And possibly while she's in her bedroom, she hears the commotion on the third level. So now she's hearing this commotion on the level that she's on, coming from Maddie's bedroom. So maybe while she's on the phone, maybe trying to call Jack D this last time, she walks out of her bedroom to go check on Maddie. And this is when she discovers the assailant in Maddie's bedroom. Maybe she wasn't saying there's someone here to alert her roommates. Maybe she was saying that into her cell phone as she was leaving a voicemail. So is it possible that maybe the entire attack has been recorded on Jack D's voicemail? Could this be the evidence that law enforcement has, the solid evidence of who was in the house that night? Because it's very possible that maybe Kaylee never hung up her phone and the attack was recorded on voicemail. Maybe she was leaving this voicemail when she walked out of her bedroom to check on Maddie. And this is when she was possibly thrown onto Maddie's bed before her life was taken. Maybe the sounds that Dylan claims that she was hearing, some from Xana's room and some from the third level, were all coming from upstairs. Maybe all of the sounds, the crying and the unknown voice and Kaylee saying there's someone here, was all coming from the third level. Because it's very possible that Ethan and Xana's lives had already been taken on the main level. It's very possible that Ethan and Xana's lives could have been taken first. They could have been the first two victims. And in my opinion, that's more of a probability than this assailant beginning on the top level. Now, the sounds that Dylan claims that she was hearing could definitely all have been coming from the top level. It would be interesting to be able to verify that by, what the sound sounded like coming from the third level if you were standing in Dylan's doorway, as opposed to what the sound would sound like coming from Xana's part of the house if you were standing in Dylan's doorway. Now, they really can't test that now because now the house is gone. So it would be interesting to know if Dylan would have been able to hear these sounds coming from the third level rather than Xana's bedroom. Maybe Dylan and Bethany's lives were spared because they never came out of their bedrooms and they wouldn't be able to identify the person or people who committed these crimes. Or there's also the possibility that whoever committed these crimes also knew Dylan and Bethany very well. So maybe that's why their lives were spared. Now, something that I've always wondered is, where exactly was the 911 call made from? Was it made from inside the house? Was it made from outside the house? Maybe half a block away? Where exactly did this 911 call come from? Another thing is, we know that Dylan and Bethany called people to the house that morning. Now, how did these people know that the house was safe to enter? If they came to the house that morning and 4 of these roommates are deceased, how do these people who are coming to the house that morning know that it's safe to enter the house. Because if I'm called over to a friend's house and I get there and 4 of these roommates are deceased, I'm definitely keeping an eye on these 2 roommates who are left alive in this house. I'm definitely keeping my eye on these 2 because that's a very strange situation that everyone in this house is deceased except for these 2 roommates. So how did the friends know when they came over that morning that it was safe to enter this house, that there was no longer any danger? Why was the 911 call made from Dylan's cell phone if she was not the one calling 911? It seems as though that it was like a group effort, that a whole group of people got together to make this 911 call, because it's been stated that there were a lot of people talking in the background and that the dispatcher actually talked to a number of people. So did they get together as a collective group in order to make this 911 call? It seems as though there would have been a lot of calls being made at this time if there were multiple people there. Because if there were multiple people at the crime scene, then there was obviously multiple cell phones. So it seems strange that Dylan didn't make the 911 call, but her phone was used to make the call. Now, something else that has always stuck with me, and it's always seemed strange to me, is that all of these victims' lives were taken one right after another, almost like ducks in a row. It's almost as though whoever committed these crimes went from one victim to the next, which to me seems very odd because it seems as though these victims they all stayed in place. Nobody tried to get away from the attacker. You know, there wasn't people moving around, which seems very strange because there would have been a lot of noise in this house. These people knew what was happening. And if they didn't know exactly what was happening in this house, they knew that whatever was happening was bad. So why didn't anybody try to flee the scene? Why did they all stay in place? Even the 2 roommates, Dylan and Bethany, never fled the crime scene. They just stayed in their bedrooms. And that's strange. It would make more sense if these victims' lives were taken by surprise. You know, if maybe they were caught by surprise in pairs, or maybe a few of them individually, rather than their lives being taken one right after another in succession. Because if that's what happened, then there's 2 victims that had to sit there and watch the other victims' lives be taken. And they didn't flee. They didn't try to get away. They just stayed in place. Now, the only way that investigators would know that Kaylee and Maddie were the first 2 victims' lives taken is through blood transfer, because they really wouldn't know the order of the victims unless they were able to determine a blood transfer, which basically means that they would be able to determine the order of these victims because there would be body fluid from the first victim inside the second victim. And there would be body fluid from the first and second victim inside the third victim, and so on. So you do have blood transfer where they could possibly determine the order that these victims' lives were taken, but only if one weapon was used. And also only if the attacker went straight from one victim to another. Because if the attacker went back to another victim, say maybe they weren't deceased and the attacker wanted to make sure that they were, so the attacker went back to a victim that they had already attacked, then that would mess up the order. That would mess up the blood transfer information. So they wouldn't have that. So it would be very difficult for investigators to know whose life was taken first. So it's very, very possible that Ethan and Xana, that their lives could have been taken first. Here's another question. Why would it be rumored that Maddie was the possible target? It seems as though the focus has always been on Maddie and Kaylee. We see them on video throughout the evening, at the corner club, walking to the grub truck, and at the grub truck. So we know where Maddie and Kaylee were all evening until they returned home. But we don't know anything about where Ethan and Xana were. There's no video of Ethan and Xana, no posts, no photographs, nothing. Really no focus at all on Ethan and Xana. So it appears that the focus has been kept on Maddie and Kaylee. Now, why is that? Is it possible that Ethan and Xana's whereabouts between 9 p.m. and 1:45 a.m. is the answer? Is that where the answers lie? Is during this time in which Ethan and Xana are unaccounted for? And is it possible that investigators have been focusing on Maddie and Kaylee? You know, the rumor that Maddie was the target. Is it possible that investigators put the focus on Maddie and Kaylee because the answers really lie with Ethan and Xana's whereabouts? Is it possible that they've distracted us with Maddie and Kaylee because they don't want us looking at what possibly happened with Ethan and Xana? Because maybe that's where the answers lie, is where Ethan and Xana were for that 4 hours and 45 minutes. So where were Ethan and Xana from 9 p.m. on November 12th until 1:45 a.m. on the morning that both of their lives were tragically taken? Thanks for hanging out with me today. And if you liked my video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Now, please stay tuned for my next video, and we'll see you next time.